Welcome to the More Perfect Union, the podcast that offers real debate without the hate. I'm Kevin Kelton on a Friday evening, a rarity for us here to record on Fridays, and I'm with Greg Matusak.
Hey, Kevin. I'm happy and I'm a little bummed. I know Biden had promised he was going to nominate a black woman, but, I always had my thoughts that maybe I'd get that phone call, that maybe he changed his mind at the last minute. But I'm glad. I think this is going to work out best for the country. I really do.
If it couldn't be you, thank God it's her, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's why I'm staying in on a Friday night. I'm not crying. I'm not staying home sad. It's for the best for the country. I know, but it still hurts a little.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about that. And also with us is another white man who was passed over for this particular Supreme Court slot, Mark Rappaport.
I'm not usually here, so I do have a little bit of hate in my heart. I'm sorry, but I'm just going to bring a little bit of the hate because I'm not really a very good debater, but man, I am a good hater.
For those of you who want to feel younger, I'm going to tell you that whatever age you are, you probably weren't born when Mark and I first met. We have known each other for 44 or 45 years.
I wasn't born when we met either.
There you go. We were college roommates. We met at our college at State University of New York in Albany, and we were both into comedy writing in college, and we co-hosted and wrote a sketch comedy show on the college radio station. And four of us had careers in the entertainment industry. I, of course, wrote for television. Mark wrote a script for Roseanne, and he wrote some TV movies and some other things. Andy Lederer was a fairly successful stand-up comic and actor, and Richard Shankman is a director who has directed a few movies. So we were at Harvard Lampoon, but we turned out some people that worked. So we do want to talk about what's in the news. Obviously, the big news this week and probably this month and this year is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I don't think it's going as well for the Russians as maybe Mr. Putin might have envisioned before things started. Greg, what do you think?
Well, Putin came in and said, look, there's all sorts of things going on in Ukraine, and I have to be there to settle things down. You guys are out of control in Ukraine. There's lots of Nazis there. There's all sorts of things going out of control. Hey, you kids, I'm coming in because, Nazism is running rampant and we can't have that. And the people in Ukraine were looking around going, what's he talking about? And he's like, I'm warning you. So he used that as an excuse.
There were enclaves of Nazism in our country.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was his excuse. And at first he was like, look, obviously this whole section over here is independent. So I'm just going to come in here and tie it down. And then he's like, well, since I'm here, I might as well take the country because y'all are pretty much Russian anyways, which it's not like Crimea. They identified most of the population identified as Russian. Ukrainians do not identify themselves as Russian. There's 44 million people. And he really thought that they would go and be like, this is great. It is not going that way at all.
Well, first of all, to build on some of the stuff you said, yes, I do think that Vladimir Putin, who up until a few weeks ago was always considered a shrewd, incredibly bright, incredibly incisive political animal, right? I'd never heard anybody call him a buffoon or say that he was having some problems with reality. But indeed, it seems now that he may be wrestling with reality. I think he really believes his own propaganda now. I think he's like Trump, really believes the insane things that he's saying.
Yeah, we all know that for the past couple of years, he has been, because of COVID, he has not been working with a lot of his generals. He has been enclosed by himself, making these decisions.
Yeah.
He doesn't consult with people and say like, oh, top scientist, what do you think? Or top general, what is your opinion? He just says, do this, it will be fine. The oligarchs who fund him will come in and say like, hey, this would be great. We could make more money if we do this. Do it. And it's done. And now he's like, if we invade this country, no one's going to stop him.
Mark actually has an insight into this that I think should be at least heard by us and the people that listen to us.
Sure.
Because Mark, you know somebody who's actually in Russia right now, right?
Yes. So my significant other, whatever, however term you wanted to. So a woman that I'm seeing very seriously. Let's just call her Paulina. That's not her name, but let's just call her that. Yes, so she is in Moscow now. We have been seeing each other quite a number of years. She needed to go back to be with her daughter. I won't get into all of the reasons why. It doesn't really matter at this point. But yes, so she's in Moscow. I talked to her several times a day through FaceTime, and just to get her perspective on what's going on there from what she sees, and then so I can share what I'm seeing with looking at my Western media.
And she is a Russian, correct?
She's Armenian by birth.
Armenian.
She's lived half of her life in Russia. She lives in. She lives here in the U.S., but she has her daughter is still in Moscow. There's the family has an apartment they own there, so she's in the family's apartment with her daughter. And I just wanted to get without leading the witness, I would ask her just like, what do you think? And so one of the things, and I think Kevin and some other people that I've mentioned this to are a little shocked. So I said, well, what do you think's going on? She says, well, I think Putin is, trying to protect us. I said, well, protect us, meaning the Russians, not the U.S. She's trying to protect the Russian. He's trying to protect the Russians. And I said, well, I think the Ukrainians might have a different perspective on that. And she says, oh, don't worry. He's not going to kill anybody. Now, this is a person that I'm very close to, more than very close to. And here she's saying, parodying, the Putin speak. So I literally called her earlier today, and I, when it was light out, and I just said, "Look out the window," because she's right in Moscow. And I said, "What do you see?" She says, "Nothing." So her perspective as a person living there, who grew up half of her life there, is this is no big deal. She even said to me, "Don't worry, it's going to be over in a few days."
Yeah. And what I found fascinating, even though that's really where she's from, that area of the world, and she lives in Russia, but she's an American-centric person, and she's spent quite a bit of time in the last few years in the United States. So it's not like she's totally foreign to our worldview. She watches CNN and MSNBC and other news outlets when she's here, and she has access to Mark. She probably has other friends that she's still in contact with in the United States. And she has access to the internet and other, social media. And yet she's still bought into the Putin line. And I found that fascinating. I would expect that of someone who is purely ensconced in daily Russian society. But I did not expect that of someone who's much more worldly. That really took me by surprise.
Right. And that took me by surprise until I realized that people in this country who have access to all of this media, remember, she's there, they have state TV. Yes, she has her phone, but she's not spending her time like I do, reading articles and stuff. Like she'll watch state TV. She's a mother. She's taking care of her daughter. She's living a normal life. She's not consumed with politics. She's consumed with surviving.
Which is why we're not using her real name.
She is a lot less concerned about this than I am, because we have a greater fear of all of this than they do, because she knows the reality of what all this stuff is, and she always downplays it. So what I'm saying is I thought it was bizarre until I realized, well, we live in a country with lots of media choices, yet look how big a percentage of people can believe a lie from our government, from WMDs and all the lies that Trump was talking about. So people can be easily convinced.
Yeah. So I had some thoughts about this. I went into this like everybody else thinking Well, he clearly wants the Ukraine, whether he wants it for, Russian hegemony to recast the old Soviet Union, or he wants it because of their vast resources, or he wants it because there's some, historic kinship between the two nations. But as this developed over the last couple of days, it really occurred to me that maybe this whole thing has nothing to do with Vladimir Putin occupying the Ukraine. Maybe this is his way to decompose, that's not the word I'm looking for, but to take apart NATO. Maybe he is betting that as this goes on, and as the NATO countries have to wrestle with sanctions that some of them want and some of them don't want, and there's some question as to, well, what happens if he moves through Ukraine and he wants to go into Slovenia or Slovakia or Poland or one of these other countries that's on the border of Ukraine? Maybe he's trying to take apart NATO by turning NATO on itself, various countries breaking apart from each other. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I heard someone, I can't remember who said it, said that he is taking advantage of all the systems that Russia belongs to, and by breaking their rules while everyone else has to follow their rules, such as the UN and NATO.
Right.
And the UN, of course, we know is broken. And so the UN can't do anything right now because Russia's on the Security Council. And even NATO right now can't do anything really, because right now Italy and Germany are really like, well, maybe we shouldn't do anything because we do not know why.
Because they don't want to live in a blackout for the next 2 months. They don't want their gas lines cut off. They don't want to have cyber warfare against their people. Think about, like, if you were living, well, Greg, you're living in a cold weather state, but if you were living in Michigan or you were living in Maine and you were thinking, if our country does the wrong thing, the heat and the electricity go out. And, we're just walking into March. Do they really want to spend the rest of the winter in the dark with no heat?
Right.
And that's the same thing that the countries that are much closer and much more dependent on Russia are worried about. That's the weapon he's using.
Yeah. So even though there are safety protocols and groups that could stop right now and do military, the hands are tied because we're following the rules that he's not.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
It's really kind of awkward, and we've put sanctions up. Everything from financial sanctions, embargoes, even Pornhub right now.
No.
Yes. I didn't want to talk about that one because I know it's personal to some people.
That's taking democracy too far.
If you're in Russia, you cannot view Pornhub. And for those of you who do not know what it is, it's nothing.
Everybody knows what it is. Everybody knows what it is.
And if you don't know what it is, I think the name kind of explains it.
It's a hub for something. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. There are a lot of commentators who believe that the reason this is happening is because we have a weak president. And
it's unbelievable. I've been
unbelievable.
Watching Fox News. What they are doing on Fox News is so beyond anything. If you don't watch Fox News and you don't know what's going on there, what's being said by Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity. I mean, last night, Tucker Carlson was saying, when you think about it, why is Russia bad, but Ukraine is good? Why is it that we have to be on Ukraine's side, but we can't be on Russia's side? Russia never, and then he listed things that they claim Biden does, Russia never, tried to put a black woman on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, that was a really creepy list, by the way.
It was an incredible list. And then, but you're sitting there going, because they're a superpower that unilaterally walked into another smaller country and is killing people. That's why they're the bad people.
And not only, let's not even just say superpower. They're an autocracy. They're ruled by a dictator. And they went into a democracy, okay? A place where they democratically elected a president. And they said, you know what? We're taking you over. And if that doesn't scare everybody and no one lifts up and we're like, oh, okay. we've seen this happen before, but most of us haven't seen it in our lifetime.
And they are blaming Joe Biden for
Right.
this debacle. Blame the guy who told his army to go to the border and then march in and start killing people. And how this falls on Joe Biden. And of course, they have their rationale, but it makes no sense.
Oh, yeah, right. Their rationale is Putin does not respect Biden. Because Putin is strong, Biden is weak.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Well, they'll say things like, it's because of the pullout of Afghanistan. And when then you go, wait a second. This was the president of a superpower that is already occupying a country, pulling the troops out to liberate that country. Now, you can say liberate them to the Taliban, but he was honoring a treaty that had been negotiated by the president right before him. And he pulled our troops out. How you can in any way compare that to storming into a country or to say that one triggered the other, it doesn't go A, B, C, D.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And especially with how Putin treated Trump. When Trump said, hey, our 3 top leading intelligence groups says that you were involved in the hacking of our last election. Well, he said he didn't. So, I guess we're going to have to believe him because he's a man of honor.
Well, I mean, again, you go back to, you've got 2 Republican presidents, Donald Trump and George Bush, who both said, hey, I hung out with the guy. I looked into his eyes and saw his soul in the case of George Bush. And Donald Trump said, well, he said he didn't do it. And the man is clearly a liar and a megalomaniac. And the fact that these 2 politicians in any way bestowed the possibility of honor on him just shows what bad politicians they are. The other thing that strikes me is all the people minute after minute after minute on cable news saying that Biden hasn't gone far enough with sanctions. He hasn't imposed enough pain on Putin. They should pull out all the stops. And I'm just thinking, maybe he knows something that you and I don't know. For instance, maybe he knows what Putin could do to us with cyber warfare if we push this man too freaking far. I heard on, actually, when I was listening to Fox News yesterday, one of their commentators said, we have the capacity, if we wanted to do this to Russia, we have the capacity through cyber warfare to turn off their traffic lights and to stop their trains from running. And I hear that and I'm thinking, well, good, but that tells me that they probably could do the same thing. And I don't know about you, Greg, but I know you drive around with your children in the car. I'm sure every now and then you go over a railroad crossing because the lights haven't been flashing and the arms didn't come down. Are you ready to go to a world where that may not mean that there isn't a train coming? Are you ready to start living in a world where the traffic lights might go out as you approach an intersection? Are people ready to see their food supplies drastically cut down, rolling blackouts, or not even rolling, days and weeks of blackouts because the grid has been hacked and shriveled up electronically?
Remember, when you can have sanctions and you're going to punish the Russian people, and you're thinking, oh, they're going to rise up against their leader. However, what have we learned? If people like Paulina, if Putin could go on TV and says, you know what, the world is against us now.
Right,
we have to rally together. Just because you think sanctions is going to get the result you think it's going to get, it may not. It may be the opposite result, and you might have people within that country with resolve that they did not have before. And and it's going to be split, just like here. There's going to be people who see Putin and look at him and go, "He's a bad guy. He's lying to us. We have to overthrow him." And then there's going to be, again, I don't know if it's 50%, but it seems that the world breaks down to roughly that way. It's like we have to rally together. Russia's being attacked. So I don't know Biden. I don't know if he's such a strategic thinker, but I do agree with Kevin. There's always something that we don't know that they might know. And if we're going to have at least some trust that Biden is at least a half decent leader and a decent human, that he might be doing something that we don't know about. And maybe until we know more, we might have to give him the benefit of the doubt. I think it's a little arrogant of us, not anybody in particular of us, but to think that we know better and that, we should be stronger in making sanctions. It's a pretty complicated issue. And maybe they know something we don't know. And maybe we need to let them do all the strategy and not have all this noise.
I just want to say this. I trust the guy who has been dealing with international foreign policy since the Nixon administration, generally before the people who are now putting him down were born. I trust that guy to have a worldview that's more sophisticated than some 42-year-old, nothing personal to you 42-year-olds, news analyst on Fox who's going, this old man, does he even know what he's doing? Does he even know what's going on? They're the idiots, not the man in the White House. The people saying things like that are the real morons.
Right. And the thing that, you're upset at Fox, but the whole idea is they're trolls. They're just
Of course.
You.
Of course.
So, you're
but people buy into it. I live with people that buy into that shit.
I know we need to push back. But
I'm not pushing back. I'm just saying it's just mind-boggling.
It's mind-boggling.
I don't think anything I'm saying is going to change it.
Yeah, but unfortunately, no one's listening to us when we're pushing back. I
agree. That's why I'm not pushing back. I'm just agog that it happens, that it actually works on people.
Right. And
like I said, I live across the street from people who I adore. And people who I know, if my house is on fire, they try to come in and save me.
Well, not after they hear this podcast.
Not after this podcast, no. But they buy into this stuff.
Right. It's dangerous and it's bad. Why they do it is because they're in the propaganda business. And that's what they're doing. Yeah. And it sickens me and it's disgusting. Anyway,
I think Kevin had made a point earlier on about how
I did.
Yeah, well, it was a point. I didn't say it was a good point. It was just a point. It was more like a rounded nub. I don't know. But you had said something. Why don't I just say that? Kevin had said something earlier on about Putin had always been considered a pretty prudent person.
Right.
And maybe this was a mistake. And this is something I wanted to bring up. What's the end game? We found out we could conquer Iraq. We did that in 5 days or 5 hours. I mean, that was pretty easy, but keeping and occupying Iraq was almost impossible. In fact, it was, right?
Right.
There's 44 million people in Ukraine. It's a big place. And the people in Ukraine have already started protesting, and they are definitely going to fight back. There is going to be protests. And unless he puts a sizable army there and locks everyone down, right. And until he can then put his own people in office, right, his own puppet regime, change the constitution, he would have to be there for years and years of political fighting and actual fighting and rebel forces. I mean, does he think that that's sustainable?
Well, again, that's if the assumption is that his end game is to absorb Ukraine. And it may be. I'm no better at reading Putin's mind than anybody else.
But do you think it was just to go in, say hey, I can walk into Kevin's house at any point, drink some milk, and then leave?
Well, again, I think that people like Putin or Xi Jinping, these people are strategic, long-term political thinkers.
Okay.
And again, it's possible that he just wants more land, or he just wants to reconstitute some version of the old Soviet Union. Yes, that's possible. But I'm just speculating that he has a different goal and a different end game, which is to break NATO apart. So to do that, a lot of people are thinking well, it's going to take him weeks or months to take over Kiev. Maybe he could, or take over Ukraine. Maybe he'll do it sooner or something. I don't think Putin is thinking in days, weeks, or months, or even years. I think he's thinking in decades. Listen, he went into Georgia in 2008. He went into the Ukraine in 2014, but it didn't do what he did this week. He didn't start it until just a couple of months ago. These people think in 5 and 10-year increments. And frankly, some of them think in 50-year increments.
Oh, because they don't have to worry about re-election. Putin doesn't have to worry about re-election, so he doesn't have to think.
They're thinking of building dynasties. They're not thinking about, 4 and 8-year presidential terms. And he's thinking about what can he do that will long-term lead to the destabilization of the West. Possibly his goal is to, affect NATO. Maybe he has some other goals. Maybe it's a combination of things. I think that we're looking at the shiny object, which is the war in Ukraine. And I think that he may be playing a little 3-card Monte with us to mix metaphors.
I think there's something to that. You're right. He's not thinking about re-election. He doesn't have to think in that short term. We think we're Americans. We think in everything short term, like what's going to happen tomorrow. We look at the stock market every day and we think what happens today and what happens tomorrow matters.
Right.
If you look at Russian history, they've been there for a long time, thousands of years before we were even a country. They're going to be there for thousands more years. And they do think long term. And the people who live there have that mentality. They also understand things don't change quickly. And that's the thing that I began to understand, seeing it through just some people who live, regular people, such a different mentality than we have, where we think, oh, we can have an election, we're going to elect Biden, all of a sudden things are going to change. They don't think that way. They don't think things are going to change, and they don't understand what their leaders are doing, and they don't expect to have it explained to them.
Right. That's my point. He sees the world differently. Because I guarantee you, let's just go back a minute and say, let's look at the theory that his goal is what he says it is, which is to reconstitute the Soviet Union. Let's assume that's why he's doing what he's doing. Okay. I don't know really any Russians other than Paulina, who I know, just casually, and she's not even Russian, but but she's from that part of the world. But I will god darn guarantee you that there's virtually no one that's walking around in Moscow or St. Petersburg or any other Russian city that's going, you know what's wrong with my life? Gosh darn, I wish we were the old Soviet Union. That's what we need to do is reconstitute the old Soviet Union. There isn't anyone in Russia other than maybe some political analysts who are sycophants of people like Putin. There's no one that's thinking, wow, our country would be so much better off if we expanded into Ukraine, or those are our brothers over there and we're separated from them by a border and a government. No one cares about that. They're trying to feed their families. And so the idea that he would be doing this for his people makes no sense whatsoever. Okay, well let's finish on something lighter. There's some interesting stuff happening in the entertainment world this week, and we like to always kind of roll into that because we don't want to just talk about politics. Greg, you said something about a new movie coming out with a musical group from the 80s that has gone Hollywood on us.
Yeah, I know you guys like musicals. I think that skews your demographic. I think the Foo Fighters, who I think are just a wonderful group, one of my favorite. Dave Grohl. There's a album coming out, and a new album they're putting out this week, and a new movie called Studio 666.
So the Foo Fighters have shot a film. And the concept came out when Dave Grohl usually writes an album or he records. He usually does a lot of the writing himself, and he rents a house usually, because when you're rich and famous, you can usually rent a house just to be away from everything. And I guess he had rented a house that had a history, supposedly haunted house. And while he was recording this thing, he said, this would be kind of a funny, stupid, dumb thing if we made a movie about, while recording, I get possessed and I go around killing everybody.
And he kind of like joked around, and they were like, yeah, sounds great. Let's do it. Let's make this movie. Awesome. And next thing you know, it's a real film. And later on, he's like, this is in the style of like, the Beatles, Hard Day Night, or Help, or like the Monkees. If these are older bands for those of you who are younger, like Head. They used to be super fun when you would get to know the rock bands as characters. They were playing themselves, but they were pretty much playing characters. Right. You would see them on the Scooby-Doo Mystery Hour too. And it was just a lot of fun to see this. Kiss did Phantom of the Amusement Park. Oh, anyone remember that one?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was just so terrible. But all these things it was just another dimension to the rock and roll experience. I'm really excited about the movie. I'm hoping to see it this weekend. And I don't usually go to the theater because,
So mention the names of one or two of the Foo Fighters, because I have no idea. I know the name of the band, but I was never into them.
So Dave Grohl used to be the drummer for Nirvana. Nirvana was the small band.
I've heard of Nirvana and I heard of Dave Grohl. Yeah.
Okay. So the other members you probably wouldn't know. Taylor Hawkins is the drummer. Pat
Sounds
Smear.
Like a skateboarder to me.
Yeah. Pat Smear.
Smear?
Pat. Yes. And yes, he does that on purpose. Okay. I don't think his parents named him that. I can't remember the other two. They're brothers. But yeah, like you probably wouldn't know these guys walking down the street. Dave Grohl, you might recognize, maybe.
Let me tell you something. I wouldn't know you two walking down the street.
I know you two. I know. I'd recognize you and Mark. See what I did there? Yeah. And I think that's something that we've kind of lost now that MTV and videos. We don't really recognize a lot of our rock stars anymore. Right. And that's kind of
they walk down the block. Like they're not like the Monkees. They all walk down together. Like
right. Here we come walking down the street.
I don't know. I think I have this belief like
never walk down the street. That's ridiculous.
I disagree. Like if you watch a lot of the Korean boy bands, they all hang out together. They all ride the subways together.
Oh, sure.
They all
boy
josh.
Bands you're saying are rock bands?
Korean boy bands.
Okay, we're down a rabbit hole so deep.
Sorry. But yes, Korean boy bands are the new rock stars, and they're worth watching. They're just enjoyable.
I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying they're not rock bands. But anyway, we can
okay, and I'm gonna move on to one other thing that I wanted to touch on. There's a new movie coming out, a new version of Cyrano de Bergerac, starring Peter Dinklage. I hope I pronounced his name right. He's a fine actor. And the fresh take on it is that instead of Cyrano being an outcast because he has an unusually large nose, in this version, he's an outcast because he's a little person. And I thought that was rather refreshing. I saw the preview several different times, and I guess one or two commercials for it on TV. And then yesterday, one of my Facebook friends was commenting that he had seen the movie, and he said it's not a bad musical. And I went, wait, it's a musical? I went back and I watched a commercial for it, and I watched the trailer. And unless you're paying attention, they don't tell you it's a musical. And I'm wondering whether the studio is a little like they think that it's going to hurt their box office if people think they're coming to see a musical, because they never show in any of the programming that I've seen, any of the promotions, they don't show Peter Dinklage singing. There is one very, very quick shot of the lead actress singing, but she's sort of singing to herself where it doesn't play like a musical. So
does he sing
yes, I read in a review that they compared him to Rex Harrison of My Fair Lady, which I don't think was a compliment.
No.
But,
Rex Harrison was very good in My Fair Lady.
I thought he was good, but apparently it's an insult to say that you sing like Rex Harrison.
It is.
Well, because it's song, it's speak singing.
Yes,
it's not really singing.
I find her very enchanting. Yes, tell us more. And then he does that through the whole thing. Right. In 1994,
he speaks in verse instead of singing.
Right.
Yes.
In 1994, I was in New York for spring break, and me and some friends went and saw a bunch of musicals, and we saw a musical adaptation of Cyrano. It was just called Cyrano, and Robert Guillaume was Cyrano. All right. And so he was a little bit older, and this is the gentleman who played Benson.
Yes.
On the TV show Benson, for all those who remember, who are big soap fans. And it was horrible. It was so terrible. It was in preview. It was the last night of preview. And the New York Times theater critic was behind us. And at intermission, he came and he said, "Are you guys enjoying this?" And we're like, not really. Because Robert Guillaume had written all his lines on his hand. And he still hadn't learned them. His sword fights were terrible. And the critic goes, wait, it gets worse, because there's going to be a scene coming up with singing nuns. It's just terrible. And then here comes the nuns coming up, and we just all laughed and laughed and laughed. It was terrible. It never made it out of preview, though. So that's all I could think of when you say, like, oh yeah, this is going to be awesome.
Well, anyways, the only thing I wanted to say on this is, like, I suspect that there's a problem with this movie, because when you're hiding the fact that your movie is a musical from the people you're trying to convince to come see it. Like, if I had bought a ticket for this film, think I'm going in to see Peter Dinklage in a dramatic update of Cyrano, and all of a sudden people started singing, I'd go, what is going on here? What is going on? Because they didn't tell me it's a musical.
Having been in the promotion business for a part of my career, what ends up happening is there have been probably a number of bad musicals, like Cats, and probably even West Side Story. Maybe it was good, whatever. It just didn't do well. So they made a bunch of musicals, and they realized people are not really digging it, but they have to promote this movie and have to get it out there. So it's not that unusual that movies are recast to get people in there. And then maybe it's still good, and people will go in there, and then word of mouth say, like, oh, it was a musical, I didn't know, and it was actually pretty good. But people are not going to go if you tell them it's a musical. So it's just part of marketing. And marketing is always a reaction to what happened yesterday. That is in entertainment marketing anyway. I've spent much of my career in that, and whatever happened yesterday will influence the way they market something.
Okay, so to wrap up this entire show with one theme, it's that whether it's the war in Ukraine or whether it's Peter Dinklage and Cyrano, we are all the victims of bad marketing.
We're all being lied to. Everything's propaganda. Everything is rhetoric. Everything is somebody's persuading you to do something, and they'll either, if the truth doesn't work to get you to do something, then other means are justified.
Right. But we don't lie to you, the audience. So when I tell you this is real debate without the hate, that is not just a marketing slogan.
I don't know about you, but I was kind of hating this whole thing the whole time.
So, Greg, thank you for being here. Mark, thank you for joining us. If you like what we do here, not you two guys, but the people who are listening, please look for us on Twitter and on Instagram. But most importantly, tell your friends about our show. Drop our link on your timeline and tell them that they should check us out. And I always plug this now. I wrote a book. It's called Super Vows. It can be found on Amazon, paperback, hardcover, or Kindle version. What else, Greg?
I'm glued. I'm watching this Ukraine thing work itself out. I will probably try to spend more time reading. Keep my mind off it.
I find myself last night. I made a fire in the fireplace. I made some snacks, like I'm watching the Super Bowl, and I sat down, put my feet up, and I watched the war. That's what our culture has come to.
I know.
Watching the war is now entertainment, like something on Netflix.
I did the exact same thing the other night. I was like, okay, let's see what's going on. I had like 3 channels, like boom, 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 boom.
Okay, well, that's it. Enjoy the war, everybody. Bye-bye.